Hello, all you freedom-loving people. Welcome to another episode of Front Page. I'm your host, Scott Cameron Goulet. Israel's longest-ruling conservative former Prime Minister Netanyahu has won another general election. He will form one of the most right-wing coalitions in the country's history. And Italy's conservative new Prime Minister Meloni took office and immediately lifted the vaccine mandate. People who lost their job due to their refusal of vaccinations can resume their jobs. Iranian protesters, unyielding to the pressure of the totalitarian government, continue to fight for their freedom. They also have the support of Iranians from around the world. Ukraine's power facilities have been attacked by Russian missiles, and the country was plunged into electricity and water supply issues. Okay, let's get into it. Newspaper editorials endorsing candidates before U.S. elections used to be the norm. Recently has become more difficult for candidates in important elections to receive public support from newspapers. What's the reason for this? In early October, some newspapers that are controlled by the New York hedge fund Alden Global Capital said that they would no longer endorse candidates running for president, for governor, and for congressional senators. Alden Global Capital owns about 200 publications, including dozens of daily newspapers, such as the Chicago Tribune, the New York Daily News, the Boston Herald, and the San Jose Mercury News. The New York Daily News issued a new endorsement policy on October 6, citing that because the country is deeply divided, they realize that selecting candidates in this environment may alienate more readers than it persuades. They said that they would focus more on local elections. However, the Gannett newspaper group, which also owns about 200 newspapers, including the Daily USA Today, has not banned endorsements of political candidates, but they are already reducing the amount of space that is devoted to commentary on national issues in favor of focusing on local issues. The new Italian Minister of Health, Orazio Scalacci, stated that healthcare workers who have been suspended for rejecting COVID-19 vaccines will soon be able to return to work. On the ministry's website, a statement reads, 6 months after the suspension of the state of emergency and in consideration of the level of COVID-19 contagion, Health Minister Orazio Scalacci considers it necessary to initiate a progressive return to normality in activity and behavior based on criteria of responsibility and respect for the laws in force. Scalacci also announced that the ministry will no longer provide a daily bulletin with the number of COVID-19 infections, hospitalizations, and deaths, but it will be updated on a weekly basis. This direction was made due to the worrying shortage of medical personnel. Under the previous government, all public and private sector workers had to have a COVID-19 green pass in order to get to work. Italians who ignored the order were suspended with no pay, and they were fined up to 1,500 euros. The Green Pass policy in Italy was considered to be among the most restrictive in Europe. The new Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has vowed to not inherit the Draghi administration's pandemic response. Despite the harsh restrictions that were placed on millions of citizens, the country suffered the highest COVID death and infection rate in Europe. Obviously, such measures of prevention are not effective. Last Tuesday, in her very first speech to the Parliament as Prime Minister, Meloni said that something clearly didn't work there. That's why I want to say that in no way will we imitate this model. On Tuesday, Israel held general elections. It was the country's fifth election in an unprecedented 4 years. Centrist Prime Minister Yair Lapid was in a tight race with the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. On Wednesday, when 97% of the votes were counted, Israeli media reported that Netanyahu's right-wing camp had managed to win 65 of the 100 seats in the Knesset. The Likud is the largest party with 31 seats. The Liberal Party, Yesh Atid, which led the coalition that brought down Mr. Netanyahu in last year's election, is expected to win 24 seats. Religious Zionism, which has won 14 seats, will be the third largest party. The results of the vote count are in line with exit polls that were taken after voting ended in Tuesday's general election. It's a good start, Netanyahu said in a video broadcast on Tuesday on Israeli public broadcaster Can 11. Netanyahu promised voters that he would form the most right-wing and religiously allied coalition in the country's history. He proposed tough measures to quell Palestinian unrest in the West Bank and to pass legislation to weaken Israel's judiciary. Israel's parliament is unicameral, meaning it has only one chamber with 120 members. The party that wins more than half of the seats in the Knesset can form a separate cabinet. Due to the proliferation of small and medium-sized parties, Israel has never in its history had a single party from a cabinet. Since 2019, Israel has been in non-stop elections. Netanyahu, who was 73, served as Israel's prime minister from 1996 to 1999 and then from 2009 to 2021. In 2019, he was accused of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. He called the three cases political persecution that was aimed at getting him out of office. After 4 inconclusive votes, he was overthrown in June of 2021 by a fragile coalition of opposition parties. These parties had little in common other than their opposition to Mr. Netanyahu. After Netanyahu was ousted, the coalition collapsed this spring due to their infighting. Mr. Netanyahu is one of Israel's most controversial political figures. He is loathed by many who are from the center and from the left, but he is admired by the liquid grassroots supporters. Despite the passage of more than a month and a half since the start of the protests in Iran, various cities of Iran are still restless, and there's no sign of the protests ending, especially among students in universities. As we reported in our program before, Iran has been gripped by protests since the death of the 22-year-old Kurdish woman Mahsa Amini while she was in custody of the morality police last month. In the regime's attempt to subside the protests, on Saturday, October 29th, the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, warned protesters that Saturday would be their last day of taking to the streets. The Guard commander, Hossein Salami, said, "Do not come to the streets. Today is the last day of the riots." Less than a day after the IRGC commander's threat, students turned many universities of the country into a scene of protest and slogans against the integrity of the Islamic Republic. The German foreign minister announced that the European Union is considering to put the IRGC on the list of terrorist organizations. Last week, they announced that they would impose new sanctions and that they would review how to include the IRGC in the list of terrorist organizations. Since the beginning of the protests, Iranians abroad have shown their support for the demonstrations inside Iran by gathering, marching, or forming a human chain on several occasions. For example, an Iranian protest anthem that has become the soundtrack to the national uprising was again thrust into the international spotlight when Coldplay performed a cover of the song and broadcast it live around the world. Coldplay played the song in Buenos Aires, Argentina over the weekend at the beginning of their world tour. They sang the anthem with Iranian actress Gul Farahani, who was singing in Farsi on stage with them. Chris Martin, Coldplay's lead singer, said that in Iran, young women and young people are fighting for their freedom, for the right to be themselves.
We're going to sing a song now that right now is being sung by many people in Iran and many of the Persian diaspora, people who left Iran after the revolution. And I don't know if you've seen on the news, but young women and young people are fighting for their freedom, for the right to be themselves. And we believe as a band that everybody should be able to be themselves as long as you don't hurt anybody else. So we fully send our love and support to all of those brave young people fighting for freedom. And there's a song that they sing which is called Baraye by an artist called Shervin Hajipour, who is in trouble with the authorities just for writing a song about people being free. So we're going to sing his song, and we're going to ask our friend Goulet, who's an Iranian movie star, to please come and help us sing. Please welcome Goulet Shifte Farahani. And
Hola, Buenos Aires. Hola.
You may not know this song, but we've got to give it everything because we're going to send this with love from here to Iran.
Friday's concert was streamed via satellite to cinemas in 81 countries, although not in Iran. In Iran, playing or singing the song could lead to your arrest. The protests in Iran were initially formed in protest against the mandatory hijab. and the slogans were about reducing restriction on women and disbanding the morality police. But now the slogans of the protests have targeted the regime and its leader. The protesters are demanding the change of the Islamic regime in Iran. This is the first time that the scope of protests has been extended to Iran's schools, and girls' schools have become one of the fields of the protest. For those of you who don't know, in Iran, the schools for boys and girls are still separated. According to Harana, the news agency of human rights activists, as of Sunday, the death toll from the protests in Iran had reached 283 people. At least 44 children were killed by the security forces of the Islamic Republic from September 17th to October 29th. According to this report, 14,052 protesters have been arrested so far, but only 1,077, which means less than 1/10 of them, have been identified. On October 31st, Russia launched one of the most massive strikes on Ukraine's critical infrastructure since the start of the full-scale military invasion. Almost the entire country remained without electricity, including the capital, Kiev. Russian missiles and drones damaged 18 infrastructure facilities in 10 regions of Ukraine. Most of them are energy-related. After this attack, problems with electricity and water supply began in Kiev. 80% of the city remained without water. At the same time, there was no explosions within the capital itself. Emergency power cuts were imposed in the entire region. According to the mayor of Kiev, the energy infrastructure facility was damaged. He advised the people of Kiev to stock up on water. In Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine, the Russian attack also caused problems with water supply with the metro, and the electric transport was cut off. In total, to this day, Russia has struck 3 Ukrainian hydroelectric power stations. In general, electricity restrictions were introduced in many cities of Ukraine last week. The power for the residents of populated regions was turned off for 4 to 6 hours. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Monday's massive rocket attack was, in part, a response to the downed Black Sea Fleet ships in Sevastopol. On September 29th, explosions were reported in Sevastopol, which is a city on the Crimean Peninsula. The Russian Defense Ministry said that the Ukrainian armed forces allegedly attacked the city with drones. At least 3 ships of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation were hit. Last week, Canada announced that it will join the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the IPEF. Canada and the United States also agree to hold their first Canada-U.S. strategic dialogue. Experts say that the move is significant. Despite being a major U.S. ally and a Pacific power, Canada has been conspicuously absent from Western strategic initiatives in the Pacific in recent years. Examples include the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Quad, and the Trilateral AUKUS Alliance. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is seen as central to the U.S. strategy to counter Communist China's economic influence in the Indo-Pacific region. It focuses on 4 areas. They are trade, supply chain resilience, clean energy, and a fair economy. U.S. economist Antonio Gasefo told the Epoch Times that while the IPEF is not a security agreement, it is a good first step in hopefully convincing Canada to join other U.S. initiatives in the Pacific or to eventually form a Pacific NATO. Tensions between Canada and China have been high since Canada arrested Huawei's chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou, in 2018. Canada clearly needs to find a way out. More cooperation with countries that share similar values and less dependence on competitors, including Communist China, would be a wise choice. As the Chinese Communist Party's overseas police agencies are exposed in the media, more and more countries in Europe and the United States are opening investigations into the CCP's overseas police stations known as Overseas 110. They are saying that the Communist Party's pattern of repression must not be allowed to extend to the free world. Peter Dolan, the founder of Defenders, said that since the publication of their report, not only the United States but also many Western security or government agencies have contacted Defenders to carefully discuss the operations of the CCP's overseas police stations. We have previously reported on the reaction of lawmakers in the United States. Now let's look at the response from Canada and from European countries. There are at least 3 overseas 110 station addresses in Toronto, Canada. Canadian RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki described the Chinese overseas police service centers as a growing problem, and an investigation is already underway. Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs ordered the closure of the overseas police station in central Dublin on October 27th. This overseas police station was opened earlier this year. Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs said that the CCP officials never sought permission to establish the station in Dublin. According to a report by The Guardian, there are 3 such police stations in the United Kingdom. 2 of them are in London and 1 is in Glasgow. The Conservative Parliamentary China Study Group has called for an investigation into overseas communist police stations. Fin Lau, one of the leaders of the 2019 Hong Kong democracy protests, revealed that he was wanted by the Chinese police and he had to flee to the UK, but he was not safe in London either. He stressed, "Over the years, we have had many Chinese and Hong Kong dissidents who have been followed or attacked in different ways by the CCP. Recently, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said that the Communist Party's Glasgow police station would be taken very seriously and that the Scottish police were already looking into the matter. In addition, the governments of Germany, Portugal, and the Netherlands have recently launched investigations into the CCP's Overseas 110. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth. Again, thank you for watching Front Page, and we will see you next time.